All right, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. This is Beyond Walled Gardens, the new measurement frontier. I'm Mark Hoebich. I'm the Executive Vice President of Luminate and the head of Film and TV. And I'd love to introduce our panelists today. On my left, I have Andre Vargas, who's the Chief Data Officer of CAA. And on the end, Liz Huszarik, Managing Partner, Maverix Insights and Strategy, and formerly the Chief Research Officer for Warner Brothers Discovery. Thanks so much for joining us today. It's great to have you both here.
Thank you.
And thank you guys for coming. You all for coming.
That's it.
I have to use the proper language.
That's right.
Non-binary.
That's right. So one of the most significant paradigm shifts we've seen in the past 12 months has been the move away from what we call the walled garden. When companies like Starz, Marvel, and Warner Brothers saw Netflix licensing their content and generating billions of dollars in revenue, they understandably became alarmed. The response was to build walled gardens in the form of their own streaming platforms. They imagined that being the sole distributor of their own content would allow them to make the most money. They priced subscriptions to enable viewers to subscribe to multiple platforms while not focusing on ad-driven revenue models. They thought that by controlling distribution and not answering to advertisers, they wouldn't have to share streaming viewership data, which of course allowed many of those companies to control the narrative of their own success. This conversation today is about how all those plans went awry. And what's next? So with that, I want to jump in. And Liz, I want to start with you, actually. So you put together a beautiful slide for us at Maverix, which we're looking at right here. And I want to level set for the room in terms of what is windowing and the evolution of windowing, because that's changed. That's really central to part of what we're discussing today.
Great. Well, I'm so excited to be here and see so many friends, so thank you all for joining today. This is a very basic slide on the syndication model for a TV series or SVOD or cable series, and how back in the day, yes, when I started, back in the day, the dark ages, we licensed our content once we had 80 plus episodes, 4 seasons to broadcast, right? To broadcast stations. You all may remember some of those big sales, Seinfeld, Friends, Home Improvement, Cosby. And then suddenly we were like, well, there's more money to be made as there was the explosion in the number of cable networks. So we not only had the broadcast syndication window, we added a cable window. So that was incremental dollars. And then it was like, well, maybe we can have 2 windows on cable. We can carve out a second window. And we're just adding up the money, right? And then SVOD came into the market, and it took us a while to convince, at that time it was Netflix, that they really needed these deep libraries of sitcoms because they thought it was all about the original. But we broke in with Friends, and Friends was a huge hit on the platform, and it drove viewing. So we carved out that SVOD window. And lo and behold, well, if we did it twice in cable, we could have a second window in SVOD, right? And so suddenly it was like, let's add a second window. And finally, we have the fast channels who have come into the space, and we have yet another window. What I didn't add, and what is on the horizon, like a ... is the social media channels, right? As the video length of tune continues to grow, TikTok now has videos up to 15 minutes. X has originals coming to the platform, 30-minute originals. We're going to start licensing for real money, right, to these platforms. So what that means is, as the licensing dollars have dwindled, as we've heard over and over, the declining viewership to some of these platforms, we've offset, or the studios have, excuse me, that's like habit. The studios have offset those losses with the increased windows.
Right, right. That's very, very interesting. So, and thank you for that. So why did studios then rush into these walled gardens? They're creating their own streaming platforms if windowing was so beneficial to them, or wider windows? And I want to ask both of you.
Yeah, you want to start and then I'll jump in, or how do you want to?
No, you go
okay,
for it, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. You're going to have to give me the hook. because I love
like
this
a premium seating.
So there's definitely money to be made in windowing, right? And there's also brand and franchise building, because each individual window that you add, that's incremental, unique new audience. Usually the duplication, and Dave and Laura's team pulls this over and over, is like anywhere from like 3, 8, maybe 10%. So 90% of that audience on that secondary, third, fourth platform is completely unique. So you're building a library, and it's all about a library at a studio, because you're going to relicense, not only to these platforms, but then you have products, you have events, you have all these extensions, and this powers the flywheel. And the studios are all about the flywheel, all of those touch points. So it's an interesting strategy when you pull the content off these platforms, well, the SVOD competitors,
Right.
for your own,
Yeah.
and put it on a walled garden. But that's all about brand building, right? You want to be that unique destination. Exclusivity is key, that you can only see Friends on HBO Max, you can only see Big Bang. But lo and behold, with churn, with content costs escalating, with just the financial models of the studios, they need the additional revenue. So we have that slingshot effect of pull it all back, license it all out.
Yeah.
And really from a studio perspective, I always equate it to building a snowman. Every new platform, you're rolling up your audience base. It's getting bigger and bigger. So in the long run, licensing is a benefit to the content, the brand, and the franchise. You have to manage that with the direct-to-consumer platform.
Right.
So there's that tension between the two.
And I think it's worth sort of mentioning, I remember, and we'll get in the hot tub time machine, I remember back in 2015, and 2015 I was having a conversation with Simon Sutton, who then was president of HBO Digital, and he oversaw distribution and digital. So HBO Now rolled up to him, and he was lamenting, at that time, if we go back, Netflix, their market cap, and Time Warner at the time were almost identical. Netflix was just slightly under. But Netflix, of course, had shy of a quarter of Time Warner's revenue. And I remember him lamenting this tremendous pressure from corporate and from Wall Street about, hey, this needs to be streaming, we need to get you into streaming. So there was a tremendous amount of pressure also from Wall Street in terms of valuing these companies.
Yes.
And I think that also pushed people, and some blinders were put on because,
Also, we were tethered at that point to the MVPD licensing agreements, right? Licensing content to the SVOD providers and not being unique to those cable networks then started to put pressure on your affiliate fees. So it was always a balancing act in the business model. Could you go out and compete head to head? Yes, but back then, those licensing fees, those affiliate fees were huge.
Right.
So, Netflix didn't have that.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
So they weren't trading that away.
Right.
Where's the hook?
I've seen Liz in person, so I knew what I was getting into.
No clue. I'm just in the middle here. It's like, wait.
No, I gave you a shot.
I know, you were so kind. That was my shot.
Andre,
it's gone.
That was the only one. That was the only one.
No, but I'm learning so much. Obviously, at CA, we are on the other side of what's going on, because we represent the creators, the talent that make these shows that then end up going through these windows, right? So I would say for creatives, this was wonderful. You have the opportunity to get your projects globally. You get to be local and global and in any language. So the more buyers, the better for our clients. So that boom was very, very beneficial for the talent that we represent. So it's plus.
Right. And that's for IP and for talent, it's really raising both of those at the same time. The more windowing, the more audiences you expose to. So let's seg into a little bit around technology. And when you look at the syndication, or rather the windowing matrix we have here, you can't help but think, and there are SaaS solutions out there, there's FilmTrack, there's RightsLines, there are solutions out there to help studios and content owners manage windowing, but it feels like it's ripe for technology. Let's talk a little bit about machine learning and how that could potentially be applied.
So you have some of the teams here that are embarking on that, right? Leveraging predictive analytics, dynamic pricing, really leaning in because they manage those libraries very, very carefully, right? Yeah. To squeeze out every dollar, but yet also ensure that they're not burning out the franchise, right? That it's not overexposed. Right. So they're always balancing the exposure with how much revenue they can make, and it's a delicate balance. So it's not like content is just being put up everywhere. There's that backroom analysis, and now with these tools, I believe, because a lot of it was done early on in Excel and then more machine learning, and now with AI, I think predicting the demand and the dollars will become much more sophisticated.
Yeah, for sure. Andre, I want to ask you about, at CAA, when packaging a pitch, and first of all, let me back up and say, I've known Andre for a number of years now, and I've had the really wonderful honor and benefit of getting a glimpse of some of CAA's capabilities. And as the major agencies go, CAA and media companies for that matter is incredibly sophisticated with their data and analytics and research teams. So when you are preparing, when an agent is preparing a client's pitch, what demographic data, what viewership data, what are you pulling in to help find the right home or direct somebody in the right way? How are you leveraging the tremendous amount of data that you have at CAA?
Well, it's a combination of the agents, the talent, and the support of the data that we provide, right? So we always have the talent at the center because we care. If you think about the studio world, you care about the project, the TV show, the movie, whatever that you are, but we care about the talent, the writer, the producer, the director, the cast, all of those. So we have to go either pitch the project to be, have an extra season because it did really well, so we need to prove that. Or you need to pick my client instead of this other client because I believe in you and you are the best. You're going to win the Oscar, right? So I need to prove that to the buyers the best way we can. So we go and get data from any signal we can get. So there is social media data, there's obviously TV performance, box office performance, there's a lot of the metadata that we get out of Luminate. I'm sure you have our solution architecture slide coming up, which we can show shortly, but
sadly that was not shared prior to press.
And it's a collaboration between, the agent personally knows the talent's dreams and ambitions, so it's about what are those opportunities they want to pursue. And sometimes we come up, it's like, hey, did you think that you could do well in this space? The data seems to indicate that this would be an area that would benefit your audience. Is this something you're interested in? So then it's a collaboration, agent talent, then agent comes back and says, well, the talent was not interested in that idea, but they're interested in this other idea. What data do you have that supports? They want to have like a wine brand of their own. It's like, oh, well, now we need to look at the audience. Do they like wines? And where are they? And what do they purchase? So there is a whole brand aspect of things. Are their audiences young or old, mostly female, mostly male? You need to know all of that. And you have to capture that from multiple sources because no single source is going to tell you that story. And so we do a lot of data mashups.
Right. And that kind of cues us up for our most interesting slide of the presentation.
Which is the architecture diagram at
CAA.
So for those that were excited, I'm going to take a picture of the CAA, big data platform architecture. So it is all in the cloud. It's all scalable. There is machine learning. There is AI. There is data visualizations. All of the things that you can look up in Google about building a modern data platform, we've built that. And the whole thing started with this idea, which is, well, Netflix doesn't give you data. Well, they gave you 6 months of data recently, right?
Right.
Most of these walled gardens don't give you data.
Yeah.
And then you get a little bit of a view of the data from some of the others. So we said, well, we're trying to measure a black hole. So our project started by being called, how do you measure a black hole? And it's by the light and movement around it. So then we said, okay, great. So what are those light signals and what are those movements? So we started to look at piracy data. I see our friends from Plum are here, so we use Plum as well. WIP is here as well. And they all give you a little bit of an image, right? So nobody has a perfect view of Netflix performance, right? But piracy tells us what is in demand where Netflix is not easily available or Max is not easily available, because humans are very smart. They will say, where can I watch this show for free? And then, whoop, these beautiful piracy sites that look just like Netflix pop up. And they're also streaming and all of those kinds of things. So you can measure a little bit of that supply and demand with that. With Plum, we measure Netflix as best we possibly can with any source that there is. And with Whip, it's just like TV time. There's people like they're really fans of TV. And so all of them have a bias. But as you combine all of them, you're getting like that mosaic we saw earlier today. There are two things that I wanted to steal from this morning. Like the mosaic is literally what our other analogy is like. We add more and more pieces. They come from different places. They're not perfect, but if it looks like a duck and does it quack like a duck, it must be a duck, right? So, and then you can say, well, this is relatively bigger than this one, and this one is relative. So you actually get a higher precision than you would otherwise just looking at one source on their own. So we do a lot of the work with machine learning and everything to unify all of these sources around a project 360 or a talent 360, a company 360, that all of this data is merged in there. So it's the unification of data. And the other one I wanted to steal, and then you can hook me out of here and just send it back. For us, because we like to turn the tables a little bit, we saw the image of the gentleman, Minack, this morning that said that the AI is the orchestrator, all of that. So for us, it's actually the other way around. It is the human that is the orchestrator of all of the little features and AIs, because for us, we call that augmented intuition. Mm-hmm. Having the best artists and agents, data is never going to match that. No algorithm is going to match that. We support that in the workflow of the work that they do. So I would put the human as the orchestrator if I were to steal that same picture.
I like that.
All right.
Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about streaming.
Where did you get my picture from? That was not approved. Jesus.
It's a few years old, though. All right, I want to talk a little bit about streaming measurement, and I want to talk about content type. Before we do, I'm just going to back up a little bit. At Luminate, we're metadata providers. We also have a streaming viewership measurement that we rolled out last July. And one of the findings that we're seeing in the data, and it's sort of interesting to share here, is what you're looking at is Reacher. This is Amazon Prime series. It just finished its second season. What's really interesting when series come out with multiple seasons, what we find is tremendous engagement around prior seasons leading up and then throughout. And all seasons related to that series get significant sampling. In this case, what we saw was that season 1, 6 weeks before season 2, was up 160%. Season 2, which premiered at number 1 and stayed at number 1 on the Luminate charts for quite some time, really lifted season number 1 into the top 10 and for the same period of time we were seeing. So it was quite significant. In terms of school spirits, this is something that Liz and Andre are going to talk about a little bit later, but with school spirits, this is a great example of shared windowing. And shared windowing is something we're seeing more and more. Today there was an announcement from Warner Brothers Discovery and Netflix that all 6 seasons of Sex and the City was going on to Netflix. Now, that's shared windowing because all of those titles are also staying on Max. And we're seeing more and more of that. In this case, School Spirits premiered on Paramount Plus, and the highest it got in the rankings was 15th out of all the content available and all the streamers available. What's interesting is when Netflix started streaming the series, it rose that same season, the first season, to the rank of number 4 on the Luminate charts. So we see that benefit, and Liz, I think you'll talk a little bit later about how much of that audience is duplicated or not, and it's very small is my understanding. But with that, I want to actually jump into the mix of content, and we've had some really interesting conversations about this, Liz.
Right, so this is a slide that we've used for years, the studio has used for years, and it continues to hold true. And what it's illustrating here is the importance of a balanced portfolio, looking at acquired library series, the share of viewing versus the originals. And SVOD is following the same pattern as the basic cable model, where 2/3 of viewing is to library product, right? Nostalgia, nostalgia, re-watching your favorites over and over again. In a C or a paradox of choice scenario, what do you go to? You go to the known, the tried and true, something you know you're going to enjoy. And so it holds true across the platforms, which is really interesting.
And I think that's why franchises are so valuable, because
Yes.
in a world where you have seemingly endless possibilities, having some insight into the content or characters or story or world bring audiences in ways that it's harder for something that's completely new.
Right. To say something maybe a little controversial, because obviously they just had this blockbuster earnings report and 13 million new subs.
Yeah.
But if there's any chink in that Netflix armor, and Alexia tells me, well, it's now they're not doing it, is those short seasons, like 3 or 4 seasons, 8 episodes, so not building libraries, where these libraries are enduring franchises and generations watch them, right? I mean, the viewers of Friends weren't born when Friends was on NBC. It's whole new generations. It's the same thing with Simpsons, right? It's whole new generations. And so that is such a pipeline and such a revenue model that the established streamers, Netflix in particular, hasn't like bought into yet, right? They run a series, 3, 4 seasons, the short episodes, and then it's gone. And they're not, that licensing window we talked about, which builds that fan base or rolls that snowball, is not part of their business model. So it's really interesting because they've started moving into the franchise model, right? Where they have restaurants, they have experiences, they have live sports with WWE and so on. But we'll see if they eventually move into library and the importance of library and building fandom across generations.
That's very, very interesting. I want to seg into actually how social is impacting. And this is a slide that Maverix also came up with and that we put into this deck with our branding. But can you talk a little bit about how social is impacting streaming and those audiences? Because it really is interesting, particularly with younger audiences.
So one pain point for me, and probably for many of my colleagues here throughout decades, has been the lack of transparency, the lack of unification, understanding viewing across platforms. And in some cases, like, our head is in the sand, right? It was in the sand when SVOD came in and started eating linear and pay cable. And no one wanted to believe, like, hey, that's the frontier. And no one wants to believe today that social video is the frontier. This is data which I am so excited I'm going to be bringing out to the market. It's based on a panel of 50 million US respondents. This is the hours viewed weekly to social media versus streaming. And we're providing a 3-year trend. So with older Gen Z, those 18 to 27-year-olds, thereabout, you can see their hours in terms of weekly hours streaming have gone from 10, 9, 8. This is behavioral data. We're tracking them versus their social media going up to 35 hours a week. What are they watching? A lot of short forms, but hours of it, right? And up to 15-minute videos. So that behavior is there. We used to have this argument within, oh, it's a life stage. They're gonna, sign up for an MVPD and hang the big, set on the wall. This was when millennials were growing up. And suddenly, cord cutting's not gonna be a real thing. Well, it's a real thing. And guess what? Streaming is now feeling the impact of social. We only have so much time, even with multiple screens. And companies that are optimizing and developing content for those platforms and not cutting it after as marketing, but really having it as part of the creative and the production process are going to win.
Thank you. This is so interesting. I want to talk a little bit about the differences between streaming platforms. So within the Luminate product, we have the 8 major SVOD platforms within the US, but each of those platforms, and Andre, you and I have talked about this at length, each of those platforms is significantly different. They have some of them have significant libraries, some of them don't. You have much fewer viewers or subscribers on a particular platform. How do you measure performance across platforms that are so different? And and also deal with the kind of inherent bias, because when we're looking at minutes watched, we know that it's favoring drama series over comedy series, for example, because you're going to have more minutes available to watch. If you have a series with many seasons, that also gets a benefit. So how do you evaluate that? I'd love to hear from you, Andre, and I'd love to hear from Liz about that, particularly your perspective for talent.
Well, so because we see the world slightly differently, we have to look at the things in context. Like if we can use our platform to say, you know what, this particular show probably has a higher affinity to work with the audience that happens to exist in Netflix versus Paramount. So you could say to an agent, your odds of selling this project is probably higher in this buyer than this buyer. So that's one way of doing it.
Yeah.
If it's the talent itself, they have audiences. And if you measure the audiences and the affinities to which platforms they watch, you know where your audience kind of is. And you say, well, if you hire Liz as the head of this particular show, she's bringing this audience. And let's say if you're Amazon, it'd be like, and they're going to buy more shoes in Amazon.com, right? So your sales argument has to be about the precise project that you're doing on behalf of your client.
Right.
So we do a little bit less of the cross-platform marketing, kind of like what's the macro view of things. We know that they're all different, so we also treat them as different buyers with different needs. So we need to understand what each of them are looking for,
right,
so that we can go in and say, guess what? So you're looking for females this and this age to buy more shoes as prime consumers.
Right.
Well, here's a talent and a show that's going to bring you that audience. That's just an example.
Interesting.
But that's the perspective that we would have.
Interesting. Liz, how about you?
It's really an interesting question, and minutes viewed is still a metric that we're all using, right? Because it is a unification, but I understand the differences in, the sitcom versus the drama length. But at the end of the day, the viewers have to be watching it to get credit, right? So if you put up 100 episodes of Law & Order and no one's watching it, it's going to tell. So I still think it's a valid metric. I think the streaming companies and services are getting much more sophisticated internally. So if you're a viewer of The Big Bang or Friends or Young Sheldon on Max, are you staying on the platform longer and not churning out? So they're looking at those figures as well, like you're more sticky. So those are, and that means in terms of sub-acquisition, your costs are going to be lower for that group, and so they have added value, right? So internal metrics are also leveraged.
Right. That makes perfect sense. And we know that Netflix is now looking at this views, where I think views is also democratizes content to a certain extent as well. So, Andre, CAA not only has a huge film entertainment business, but also is incredibly successful in representing sports talent, representing live events. How are you evaluating, how does this new measurement that we're seeing around streaming platforms, how does that affect those businesses and that evaluation process for you and CAA?
Yeah, so our obsession is really understanding the value contribution of our clients to all of these companies, right? So we have the best job, and I have a couple of my colleagues here that are putting nut in, because of the variety of the businesses that we have to support, right? So there is, like you said, there's sports, but sports is soccer, basketball, football, it's coaches, it's baseball, ice hockey, like I lose track of all of the sports that you have.
Bull riding.
Well, not us.
No, I know. Your
Somebody
competitor.
else decided that
Yes.
bull riding was core to the talent agency business, but that is for them to
Yes.
to evaluate, not for me to evaluate. But the variety of all of that, and all of these clients, they are in social media. That has to be used to get them the endorsement deals that then they're going to be in commercials or they're going to be brand endorsed. They play an all-star game. You see spikes of an audience growth, and then sometimes they want to be in TV as well. Our music is mostly touring, right? So that's more of for the quants here, that's more of an operations research type of optimization. You're placing an act in a place, in a point in time, in the constraints of the weather, the constraints of who else is playing. So that is a different kind of analytical tool set that you have to provide our music agents. But those tours are also going to have brand partnerships. So what's the right brand that is going to have an authentic reaction with the audience? Like if I'm a vegetarian, I'm not going to do a commercial for Omaha Steaks. I'm going to be a sellout in front of my audience, right? And my opening act, we also use data to figure out which should be a young band to open for this particular band. You want to have somebody that is not going to be, turning off the audience like, who are these guys? What time is my band coming up? And sometimes if you've been to a concert and the opening act, you're like, wow, this band's pretty good. Who are they? You want to have that experience. You discover new talent. So talent discovery, opportunity discovery is what we care about. Talent not always want to make the biggest money. That will be shocking to all of you. But some of them might be like, I have a pet project that I've been wanting to do for the last 30 years, and I want to do it now, and it's a documentary, and I have to do it. So how do you support that, and where is the data around that? So I think the variety of the work, and the data is out there, the signals are there for music, for brands, for social, for streaming. It's a problem of too much data. And how do you simplify that, unify that in a way that you can just ask it a few questions? Because I'm going to tell you this little thing. This is not a brand endorsement for the brand that I'm going to talk about, but we have this agent that I asked him, hey, I need more adoption for our data tools, and it's like, oh, but Andre, they're so complicated, there's so much data in it. I'm an agent, I'm not an analyst, I'm a deal maker. You gave me an iPhone, and all I know what to use is a Fisher-Price phone. Can you simplify exactly to what I need? So we have this co-designed relationship with our agents, where we're like, okay, so if you're a researcher and an analyst, you might want to have 50,000 things in your dashboard because you know what you're looking at. But an agent might need 2 or 3 very simple things that really match that moment where they're going to have a call with a client. They just want to know 3 things about what's going on. Or they're calling a buyer, what are the 3 things they need to know? So that simplification is really the hardest part of our job, because gathering data, there's like too much data.
I mean, this piques my interest though. So there is a real focus on revenue in all of our businesses, and including CAA, of course. And how do you maximize revenue for a client, and what data are you leveraging to do that?
That's top secret. that's not coming out here. Nice try. I think that was one of the red-lined ones.
All righty, we're moving on.
We maximize opportunity.
Okay, we'll accept that. You've got to try. Liz, let's talk about the future challenges that you're seeing in measurement, in particular, how social networks and TikTok and YouTube are impacting Gen Z. And you've got something really interesting here to share.
Right, so this slide dives into the social video from the prior slide. And 85–90% of that social video that we saw on the other slide, the 35 hours for our older Gen Z, is being driven by 2 platforms, TikTok and YouTube. We're getting a sign, a hook, I think.
It goes very quick.
Okay.
Yeah.
Quickly
5
though.
seconds.
Oh.
5 minutes, I think is the 5 minutes.
So I'm just going to take you through a couple lines. That top line is our older generation Z, again, that 18 to 27-year-old, and the majority of their time is spent on TikTok. You see how high that line is. Where the second line in the grid is the younger Gen Z, but that's the YouTube. So very distinct platforms for each component of or segment of that generation, right? The older Gen Z is spending the majority of their time on TikTok. The younger Gen Z is spending the majority of their time on YouTube. Now they could be watching TikTok on YouTube Shorts, right? And that's their introduction. But that very bottom line there is the younger Gen Z on TikTok. So they're on TikTok already. They're just not spending the number of hours. And the second from bottom is older Gen Z on YouTube. So again, they're there and it's meaningful hours, nearly 10 hours a week. It's being eclipsed by over 20 hours a week on TikTok. So when TikTok was here and taking us through that data, how important that platform is, not only as a social platform, as a video platform, as a retail platform. It really is a cultural platform that is impacting generations.
Thank you so much. That's so interesting. I want to thank you both. You know, before we wrap things up, though, I do want to just open it up to questions. We have just a couple minutes left. Does anybody have a question for Liz or Andre or myself? Yeah, in the back.
So we know that there are really big differences between fans and super fans. When we think about windowing, how do you think that super fan, and in particular, sometimes that super fan is a very, very, very small percentage, but of course very passionate, very key to driving. You know, are there strategies like, for example, even the studios releasing content or being direct to super fans before the windowing even goes to the platform, or other kinds of strategies really designed to leverage that phenomenon of super fan?
That's such a great question, Dwayne. In my experience, while fandom is critical and for building a brand and or franchise, it really is more about the revenue availabilities, the audience. Is it going to be duplicated? Are you going to create fatigue because of too much overexposure? The fan and super fan has not been as much a part of that licensing discussion because it's driven by the revenue models. And that may change as those super fans have more to spend and as these data points prove that if you put it on certain platforms, that incremental spending will lift, but we haven't had the tools that connected, right, all of those behaviors.
Any other questions?
They're like, we want to get the hell out of here.
Well, thank you very much, Liz. Thank you,
You
Andre.
guys.